My phone buzzed at 2 in the morning, while I sat hunched over quarterly reports at my accounting firm. The text from my younger brother Marcus made my blood freeze. "Hope you die alone, you pathetic loser. Dad's right about you being worthless." This came after 24 years of watching Marcus get every advantage, while I scraped for approval from parents who saw me as their disappointment. 3 hours later, Mom's panicked voice shattered my sleep. "Marcus overdosed. Send $15,000 right now or he dies." I hung up without hesitation, convinced this was another manipulation scheme, and rolled back into bed, completely unaware that my decision would ignite the most devastating family war of my life. The relentless buzzing of my phone dragged me from restless sleep at 7:30 in the morning. 57 missed calls, 34 voicemails. My stomach dropped as I realized something genuinely catastrophic had happened. Before I could process the messages, violent pounding erupted from my apartment door. "Derek, open this door right now." My sister Jennifer's voice cracked with raw desperation. I stumbled across my cramped one-bedroom apartment in downtown Cleveland, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled dress shirt and slacks. When I opened the door, Jennifer collapsed against the frame, her medical residence scrub stained with tears and what looked like vomit. Her usually perfectly styled auburn hair hung in tangled clumps around her face. "He's gone, Derek. Marcus is dead." The words hit me like a physical blow. The $15,000 wasn't some scam. It was for experimental naloxone treatment at university hospitals. They had a new protocol that might have worked, but it required immediate payment because insurance wouldn't cover it. My legs gave out. I sank onto my secondhand couch, the reality crashing over me in waves. "What happened? How did he—" Jennifer wiped her nose with her sleeve, a gesture so unlike her usual composed demeanor that it made everything more real. "Fentanyl overdose at a fraternity party. Someone called 911, but by the time paramedics arrived, he'd been down for at least 8 minutes. Brain damage was extensive. The experimental treatment was our only shot." The apartment door burst open again. Mom and Dad stormed in without knocking, their faces twisted with grief and rage I'd never seen before. Mom's real estate blazer was buttoned wrong, and Dad's construction boots tracked mud across my carpet. They looked like they'd aged 10 years overnight. "You killed him," Mom screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You let your own brother die because you're too selfish to help your family." Dad's massive hands clenched into fists. 28 years old and you can't spare 15 grand to save your brother's life. What kind of monster are you? I thought it was another one of his schemes. I shot back. "Do you have any idea how many times Marcus has lied about needing money? Remember when he claimed he needed $3,000 for textbooks and spent it on that motorcycle?" Jennifer stepped between us. "Stop it. Fighting won't bring him back." "Don't defend him," Dad snarled. "He chose money over blood. Marcus sent that text because he was high and angry about Derek refusing to co-sign his student loans last month. Even drugged out of his mind, he knew his brother had abandoned him." The revelation hit like ice water. The loan co-signing. Marcus had begged me for weeks to help him qualify for additional student loans. I'd refused because his credit was destroyed from maxed-out credit cards and missed payments. I thought I was teaching him responsibility. Instead, I'd apparently driven him to that fatal overdose. Mom's voice turned venomous. "We've spent $43,000 over the past 2 years getting Marcus clean. Rehab programs, therapy sessions, medical bills. We mortgaged our house to pay for his treatment. And when we finally needed help, you turned your back on us." "I didn't know it was real," I protested. Every crisis with Marcus turned out to be manipulation. The supposed mugging that needed $500 for hospital bills. The fake car accident that required insurance deductibles. The imaginary scholarship program that needed upfront fees. "This time was different," Jennifer whispered. "I was at the hospital when they brought him in. I saw his condition. The doctors explained the experimental treatment protocol. It had a 60% success rate for cases like his." Dad's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. 60% chance we could have saved him. Instead, Our son died alone in a hospital bed, while his brother slept peacefully counting his precious money. The guilt crashed over me in suffocating waves. Had I really become so cynical about Marcus's problems that I'd ignored a genuine life or death emergency? The image of my little brother dying alone while I dismissed Mom's desperate pleas made me physically ill. "We should have called you directly," Jennifer admitted. "But Marcus made us promise months ago never to involve you in his problems again. He said you'd made it clear he was on his own." Mom's tears had turned to cold fury. "Well, congratulations, Derek. You got your wish. Marcus is finally out of your life permanently. I hope you're satisfied." They moved toward the door, like a pack of wounded animals. Dad turned back one last time, his weathered face etched with pain I'd never seen before. "Don't bother coming to the funeral. You're dead to us too." The door slammed shut, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that my family was right. I had chosen financial self-protection over my brother's life. Even if Marcus had been manipulative before this time, the crisis was real, and I'd failed him when it mattered most. 3 days later, I stood outside Riverside Methodist Church in my hometown of Brookfield, Ohio, watching my brother's funeral from across the street. Despite Dad's warning, I couldn't stay away. The parking lot overflowed with cars, and people I'd known my entire life streamed into the brick building where I'd been confirmed 15 years earlier. The sight that broke my heart was Uncle Gary's police cruiser parked prominently near the entrance. Gary had been my hero, growing up the family patriarch who'd taught me to fish change oil and throw a proper curveball. If anyone would understand my side of this nightmare, it should be him. I waited until the service ended before approaching. The crowd filing out of the church parted around me like I carried some infectious disease. Mrs. Henderson from our old neighborhood crossed herself and muttered something about family betrayal as she passed. Tommy Rodriguez, who'd been my best friend through high school, looked straight through me like I was invisible. The worst moment came when Gary emerged, still wearing his dress uniform, from serving as an honorary pallbearer. Our eyes met across the church steps, and his expression shifted from grief to disgust. "You've got some nerve showing up here," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The remaining mourners stopped their conversations to watch our confrontation. I felt dozens of eyes boring into me, filled with judgment and condemnation. "Gary, I need to explain what really happened." I started. "Explain what? How you let your baby brother die for $15,000. His voice carried across the parking lot. "Your parents told us everything. Marcus was fighting for his life and you hung up on your own mother." "There's more to the story than—" "More to the story." Gary stepped closer, his police training evident in his intimidating posture. "The story is simple, Derek. Your family needed help and you chose selfishness. That boy worshipped you when you were kids. He followed you everywhere, wanted to be just like his big brother. And when he needed you most, you abandoned him." The crowd murmured agreement. I recognized neighbors, family friends, people from our church congregation, all nodding along with Gary's public shaming. In small-town America, news travels fast, and apparently Mom and Dad had shared their version of events with everyone who'd listen. Marcus had problems. I tried to explain. He'd lied about needing money before. "So you decided this time was another lie." Mrs. Patterson, my third-grade teacher, shook her head sadly. "That poor boy was crying out for help, and his own brother turned his back." Amanda appeared beside Gary, her eyes red from crying. We'd been together for 3 years talking about marriage, building a life together. She taught second grade at Brookfield Elementary and had always been the voice of compassion in our relationship. "I can't do this anymore, Derek," she said quietly. "I thought I knew who you were, but someone who could be so heartless toward family." She shook her head. "I can't be with someone like that." She pulled off her promise ring and pressed it into my palm. "Maybe someday you'll understand what you've lost. Not just Marcus, but all of us." The crowd began dispersing, leaving me standing alone in the church parking lot like some kind of pariah. Even Jennifer avoided eye contact, as she helped Mom into Gary's cruiser. Dad didn't acknowledge my existence at all. That evening, I drove to Mom and Dad's house, desperate to find some way to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. The modest ranch home where I'd grown up looked the same from the outside, but inside, everything had changed forever. I found the spare key under the ceramic frog by the back door, the same hiding spot we'd used since childhood. The house felt eerily quiet as I stepped into the kitchen. Mom's coffee pot still sat on the counter, but the usual warmth and life had been sucked out of the space. I climbed the stairs to Marcus's bedroom, drawn by some need to understand my brother better in death than I had in life. The room remained exactly as he'd left it. Clothes scattered across the floor. Textbooks stacked on his desk, posters of rap artists covering the walls. But something felt different about his desk area. I'd been in this room countless times over the years. Yet today, I noticed a loose floorboard beneath his chair. Curiosity overcoming my grief, I pried up the board with my car key. Hidden underneath was a black composition notebook, the kind used for school assignments. Marcus's name was written on the cover in his distinctive handwriting. I opened it expecting to find class notes or homework assignments. Instead, I discovered something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family's tragedy. Marcus's journal contained entries spanning the past 8 months, written in the cramped handwriting I remembered from his childhood thank you notes. But these pages revealed a side of my brother I'd never suspected existed. The first entry, dated 6 months before his death, made my blood run cold. Took Mom's emerald earrings today, the ones Grandma left her. Sold them to Tony for $300. Mom hasn't noticed yet. Probably thinks she misplaced them. It's amazing how easy it is to take stuff when people trust you completely. I flipped through page after page of similar confessions. Marcus had systematically stolen from our family for months. Mom's jewelry box had been slowly emptied. Dad's expensive tool collection had disappeared piece by piece. Most shocking of all, Marcus had taken $2,300 from Jennifer's medical school fund money she'd saved from working double shifts at the hospital. But the thefts were only the beginning. The journal revealed that Mom and Dad knew about the stealing. They'd caught him multiple times, but covered for him, blaming his addiction disease and enabling his behavior rather than setting boundaries. Had another family meeting today. One entry read, Mom cried about the missing jewelry. Dad threatened to kick me out, but they won't do it. They're too afraid of what people will think if their son ends up homeless. So I told them I'd get clean if they gave me one more chance. Same song, different day. The entries grew more disturbing as Marcus's addiction progressed. He wrote about manipulating their guilt, playing on their love for him to avoid consequences. He'd learned exactly which buttons to push, to get money forgiveness or protection from the fallout of his choices. The most chilling entry was dated just 2 weeks before his death. Screwed up big time. Stole $5,000 from Snake's operation. He's not like the college dealers who'll accept payment plans. Snake wants his money in full plus interest, or he starts hurting people. Told him I'd pay him back with family money, even promised him Dad's business equipment as collateral if I couldn't come up with cash. My hands trembled as I read the final entries. Marcus hadn't accidentally overdosed at a fraternity party. He'd intentionally taken a massive dose of fentanyl as a suicide attempt, knowing he was about to destroy our family through his debt to Snake. Can't live with what I've done. The last entry read, Snake wants $30,000 now, not just the $5,000 I stole. He's threatened Mom, Dad, and Jennifer. Says he'll take everything we own to settle the debt. I've ruined their lives, just like I've ruined everything else. Maybe if I'm gone, they'll figure out how to save themselves. The $15,000 Mom and Dad had begged me to send wasn't for experimental medical treatment. It was blood money to pay off Marcus's drug debt and protect our family from a dangerous criminal's retaliation. But Marcus had actually owed $30,000, not $15,000. Even if I'd sent the money, it wouldn't have been enough to save anyone. I sat on Marcus's bed, surrounded by the artifacts of his double life, trying to process this devastating revelation. My parents had known about his stealing, his manipulation, his dangerous choices. Yet when he died, they'd chosen to blame me rather than acknowledge the truth about their golden child's destructive behavior. The bedroom door creaked open behind me. I spun around to find Jennifer standing in the doorway, her face pale as she saw the journal in my hands. "You found it," she whispered. "You knew about this." She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. I knew about some of the stealing, the money from my medical fund, but I didn't know how bad it had gotten until after he died. Why didn't anyone tell me the truth about what happened? Jennifer sank into Marcus's desk chair, looking older than her 26 years. Because it was easier to blame you than admit we'd all failed him. Mom and Dad couldn't face the fact that their protecting and enabling had made everything worse. And I couldn't admit that I'd stayed silent about the stealing because I was afraid of causing more family drama. So you let me become the scapegoat. At first, yes. It felt better to have someone to blame than to face the reality of how completely Marcus had manipulated all of us. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But reading that journal, seeing what he wrote about planning his own death, I realized we'd all been living in denial for months. I stood up, the journal clutched in my fist. I'm taking this to Mom and Dad. They need to see what really happened. They won't believe it, Jennifer warned. Dad's already convinced himself that Marcus wrote those entries while high, that they don't represent his true feelings. And Mom thinks you planted the journal to make yourself look better. That's insane. Grief makes people insane, Derek. It's easier to hate you than to admit they failed as parents. I stormed out of the house driven by righteous fury and the need for vindication. 20 minutes later, I burst through Mom and Dad's front door without knocking the journal in my hand, like evidence in a criminal trial. They sat at the kitchen table holding hands and staring at a photo album filled with pictures of Marcus as a child. The scene was so heartbreaking that my anger almost faltered. Almost. "We need to talk," I announced, slamming the journal on the table. Dad looked up with cold eyes. "I thought I told you to stay away." "Read this," I demanded, opening to the pages about the stealing. "Read what your precious son really thought about this family." Mom recoiled, as if the journal was contaminated. "I'm not reading some fabricated evidence you created to make yourself feel better about letting Marcus die." Fabricated? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is Marcus's handwriting. His thoughts. His confession about stealing from all of you. "Marcus never stole anything," Dad said firmly. "He borrowed things sometimes when his addiction made him desperate, but he always intended to pay us back. He wrote about manipulating your guilt, about planning bigger thefts, about owing $30,000 to a drug dealer who threatened to kill you all." Mom stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Stop it. I won't let you destroy my son's memory with lies and made-up stories. The medical treatment was never real." I pressed on. "The $15,000 was drug money to pay off his dealer. Even if I'd sent it, it wouldn't have been enough to save him." Dad's face turned purple with rage. "Get out of my house. Your brother is dead because of your selfishness, and no amount of fake evidence will change that fact." They refused to read the journal, refused to acknowledge the truth about Marcus's choices, refused to consider that maybe I wasn't the villain in this tragedy. As I left their house for what I thought would be the final time, I had no idea that Marcus's drug debt was still very much an active threat to our family's survival. 4 days after my confrontation with Mom and Dad, I sat in my apartment, trying to focus on work, when Jennifer called, her voice barely controlled panic. "Derek, you need to get to Mom and Dad's house right now. There are men here demanding money. Dangerous men." I broke several speed limits racing back to Brookfield. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I saw 3 motorcycles parked on the lawn, and the front door standing wide open. Voices carried from inside the house, one of them speaking in the kind of calm, measured tone that made my skin crawl. I crept to the front window and peered through the gap in the curtains. 3 men in leather jackets stood in our living room, the largest one examining family photos on the mantelpiece, while Mom and Dad huddled together on the couch. Jennifer stood pressed against the far wall, her medical training apparently doing nothing to help her in this situation. "Nice family," the largest man was saying. His voice carried a slight southern drawl. "Shame about Marcus. Kid had potential, but he made some poor financial decisions." This had to be Snake, the dealer Marcus had written about in his journal. He looked older than I'd expected, maybe 35, with graying temples, and the kind of quiet confidence that suggested violence was always an option. "We told you we don't have $30,000. Dad said, his usual bluster replaced by genuine fear. "But see, that's where you're wrong, Robert." Snake set down a family portrait and turned to face my parents. "Marcus was very specific about your assets when he needed to guarantee his debt. Your house is worth about $140,000. Your construction business has equipment worth at least $50,000. Jennifer's car is nice, probably worth $15,000. "You can't take our home," Mom whispered. "Actually, I can." Marcus signed papers promising family assets as collateral. Now I'm a reasonable businessman, so I'm willing to work out a payment plan. But the debt needs to be acknowledged and addressed within 72 hours, or I start collecting. One of Snake's companions, a younger man with neck tattoos, pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of everything in the room. Serial numbers on the television, the antique clock on the mantel, Mom's china cabinet. "No, no, no." Dad struggled to his feet, his face flushed red. "My son had no right to promise our belongings. Those papers aren't legally binding." Snake's expression didn't change, but something deadly flickered in his eyes. "Legal and binding are two different concepts in my business, Robert. Marcus owed me money. Marcus is dead. The debt transfers to his family. That's how this works." "We could call the police," Jennifer suggested, her voice barely audible. The room went silent for several seconds. Snake's two companions exchanged glances, and I saw them subtly position themselves closer to my family. "You could do that," Snake agreed conversationally. "But then, I'd have to explain to the police how your brother stole $5,000 from my operation and failed to pay it back with the agreed-upon interest. I have security footage of Marcus taking the money. I have the papers he signed. I have witnesses to our business arrangement." Dad's bluster crumbled entirely. "What kind of interest?" "Standard rate for my industry. 500% annually compounded monthly. The $5,000 Marcus stole 8 weeks ago is now worth about $30,000. The number hit my family like a physical blow. Mom made a choking sound and grabbed Dad's arm for support. Jennifer's face went completely white. "That's impossible," Dad protested. "Nobody charges interest rates like that." "People in my line of work do," Snake replied. "Marcus understood the terms when he took my money. He also understood the consequences of default." Dad clutched his chest suddenly, his breathing becoming labored. The stress and shock were taking their toll on his 54-year-old heart. He staggered backward, bumping into the coffee table. "Dad?" Jennifer rushed to his side, her medical training kicking in. "Someone call 911. "Nobody's calling anyone," Snake said firmly, but his expression showed genuine concern. "Robert, you need to sit down and breathe slowly. Stress-induced cardiac events are treatable if you don't panic." The surreal scene of a drug dealer giving medical advice while threatening my family's livelihood almost made me laugh hysterically. But watching Dad struggle to breathe, seeing the terror in Mom's eyes, witnessing Jennifer's desperate attempts to help while trapped in an impossible situation, I realized this nightmare was far from over. Dad collapsed onto the couch, his skin turning gray. Jennifer felt his pulse and looked up with alarm. "His heart rate is dangerously irregular. We need to get him to a hospital immediately." "After we finish our business discussion," Snake said. "He could die," Jennifer shouted. "So could all of you if this debt isn't resolved," Snake replied calmly. "But I'm not unreasonable. Jennifer, you take your father to the hospital. Patricia, you stay here with me while we work out payment arrangements. We'll have this sorted by the time Robert's feeling better." That's when I knew I couldn't hide outside any longer. My family might have blamed me for Marcus's death. They might have cut me out of their lives, but I couldn't watch them be destroyed by my brother's choices while I did nothing. I stepped through the front door, my hands raised peacefully. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Snake turned toward me with mild curiosity. And you are? Derek, Marcus's older brother. Ah, the one who refused to help save Marcus's life. Your reputation precedes you. The accusation stung, but I forced myself to stay focused. I'm here to discuss a reasonable resolution to this debt situation. Snake smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm listening. Give me 72 hours to arrange financing. I'll guarantee payment of the full $30,000 in exchange for your agreement to leave my family alone permanently. Derek, no, Mom whispered, but I ignored her. Interesting proposal, Snake mused. But I already have guaranteed payment through your family's assets. Why would I accept a promise from someone who wouldn't even help his own brother? Because I can pay in cash, no legal complications, no paperwork trail. Clean and simple. Snake studied me for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. 72 hours, Derek. Full payment in cash, or I start collecting from your family's property. And if you disappear, or try to involve law enforcement, everyone you care about suffers the consequences. As Snake and his companions left, Mom burst into tears of relief and gratitude. Dad's breathing slowly returned to normal, though Jennifer insisted on taking him to the emergency room for evaluation. For the first time since Marcus's death, my family looked at me with something other than hatred. But I had no idea how to raise $30,000 in 3 days. And more importantly, I had no intention of paying a criminal's extortion demands. Instead, I was about to do something that would either save my family or get us all killed. That evening, while Dad underwent cardiac monitoring at Brookfield General Hospital, I made a phone call I'd been dreading since the funeral. Gary, it's Derek. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need your help. Uncle Gary's voice was cold. You've got some nerve calling me after what you've done to this family. There's something you need to know about Marcus's death. Something that changes everything. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, considering whether to hang up or listen. Finally, curiosity won over anger. You have 5 minutes. I drove to Gary's house with Marcus's journal, my hands shaking as I knocked on his front door. Gary opened it, wearing his off-duty clothes jeans and a Brookfield Police Department t-shirt, his expression skeptical and hostile. This better be good, Derek. I handed him the journal without saying a word. Gary took it reluctantly, as if touching something contaminated, but began reading the first entry. I watched his expression change from skepticism to confusion to horror as he absorbed Marcus's written confessions. Jesus Christ, he whispered, sinking into his recliner. How long has this been going on? 8 months, according to the dates. But Gary, there's more. The drug dealer Marcus owed money to showed up at Mom and Dad's house today. He's demanding $30,000 and threatening to take everything they own. Gary's cop instincts took over immediately. What's this dealer's name? Goes by Snake. 3 guys on motorcycles. They have some kind of paperwork Marcus signed using family property as collateral. Gary set the journal aside and reached for his phone. We're calling this in right now. Extortion, criminal threatening, probably drug trafficking. Wait. I stopped him before he could dial. I have a better idea. For the next 2 hours, we developed a plan that would either destroy Snake's operation completely or get me killed in the process. Gary contacted his DEA connections agents, who'd been trying to build a case against Snake's network for months. They were thrilled to have an inside opportunity to gather evidence and make arrests. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would wear a wire during my next meeting with Snake, secretly recording his extortion demands and threats against my family. Simultaneously, Gary would coordinate with federal agents to track Snake's associates and identify their drug distribution locations. This is incredibly dangerous, Gary warned as we finalized the details. If they discover the wire, if they suspect law enforcement involvement, you could end up like Marcus. Better me than the whole family, I replied. Besides, someone needs to make Snake pay for what he's done. The next morning, I called Jennifer at the hospital where she was staying with Dad during his cardiac recovery. How's he doing? Stable, but the doctors want to keep him for observation. The stress triggered some irregular heartbeats that need monitoring. Her voice was exhausted. Derek, what you offered to do yesterday, paying that man? You can't actually have $30,000. I don't, but I have something better. I explained the plan to her, watching her expression shift from confusion to fear to grudging admiration. As a medical professional, Jennifer understood risk assessment better than anyone. You're talking about deliberately provoking dangerous criminals while wearing surveillance equipment. The statistical likelihood of something going wrong. The statistical likelihood of our family losing everything is 100% if we do nothing. I interrupted. Marcus created this mess, but I'm going to finish it. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, What do you need from me? Medical documentation of Dad's stress-induced cardiac event. Something that proves Snake's threats caused actual physical harm to a member of our family. It'll strengthen the extortion case. I can do that. But Derek, if something happens to you during this operation, then make sure Mom and Dad know I tried to fix what Marcus broke. That afternoon, Amanda appeared at my apartment door unannounced. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot, like she wasn't sure she should be there. I heard about what happened with those men at your parents' house, she said quietly. Jennifer told me you're planning to help them. Trying to anyway. Amanda stepped inside without being invited, a familiarity that reminded me of better times in our relationship. I owe you an apology, Derek. After the funeral, after everything people said about you letting Marcus die, I jumped to conclusions without hearing your side. You weren't wrong to break up with me, I said honestly. I did refuse to help when my family called. I did choose to protect myself instead of trusting them. But you didn't know it was real. And from what Jennifer told me about Marcus's journal, maybe your instincts about his manipulation weren't completely wrong. Amanda sat on my couch, the same spot where she'd returned her promise ring just days earlier. I wanted to ask if there's any chance we could try again. Start over, maybe. The offer was tempting. Amanda represented normalcy, the life I'd been building before this nightmare began. But something had changed in me over the past week. I'd learned to value self-respect over people-pleasing truth, over comfortable lies. I appreciate that, Amanda. I really do. But I think we both need to figure out who we are outside of this relationship before we can know if we belong together. She looked hurt, but nodded. That's probably the mature thing to do. After she left, I spent the evening preparing for the most dangerous 48 hours of my life. Tomorrow, I would confront Snake while wearing a wire gathering evidence that would either destroy his operation or get me killed in the process. But for the first time since Marcus's death, I felt like I was fighting for something meaningful, instead of just defending myself from accusations. My family might not trust me yet, but I was about to prove that blood still mattered, even when that blood carried the stain of betrayal and manipulation. The wire felt like a cold snake against my chest. As I drove to the meeting location, Snake had specified a closed auto repair shop on the outskirts of Brookfield. Gary sat in an unmarked police car, 2 blocks away, coordinating with DEA agents positioned around the perimeter. Everything depended on me, staying calm, and getting Snake to incriminate himself on tape. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Dad's stable. Whatever you're about to do, we believe in you. Snake was waiting inside the garage, with the same 2 companions from before, examining a motorcycle engine with casual interest. He looked up when I entered, his expression amused. Derek, right on time. You have something for me. I have a proposal, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Before we talk payment, I need to understand exactly what my family is dealing with. Snake wiped his hands on a greasy rag and leaned against the workbench. Your family is dealing with a $30,000 debt that your brother incurred when he stole from my operation. Pretty straightforward business transaction. But Marcus is dead. How can a debt transfer to people who had nothing to do with the original agreement? Because Marcus used your family's property as collateral when he guaranteed repayment. Your parents' house, your father's construction equipment, your sister's vehicle. All legally documented. Snake pulled out a folder and showed me papers with what appeared to be Marcus's signature. Your brother was very thorough when he needed to secure his debt extension. What happens if we can't pay? Then I start collecting assets to recover my losses. House gets sold, equipment gets repossessed, vehicles get transferred to new ownership. Your family finds somewhere else to live. The wire captured every word of his casual threats. But I needed more specific evidence of criminal activity. When you say you start collecting, what does that process look like exactly? Snake's eyes narrowed slightly, perhaps sensing something different in my questions. Why are you so interested in the details, Derek? You planning to write a book about this experience? I want to understand what I'm agreeing to pay for. $30,000 is a lot of money for something that started as $5,000. Interest and penalties, standard business practice. Your brother knew the terms when he took my money. One of Snake's companions, the younger man with neck tattoos, suddenly stepped closer to me. Boss, something feels off about this conversation. Why is he asking so many specific questions? My heart rate spiked, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'm asking questions because I need to know what I'm getting my family into. If I pay you $30,000, does this end permanently, or will you find excuses to demand more money later? Snake studied me for several long seconds. You know, Derek, you're a lot more suspicious than your brother was. Marcus trusted everyone, which is how he ended up stealing from me in the first place. I don't trust anyone. That's why my family blames me for Marcus's death. Smart policy. Snake seemed to relax. Yes, $30,000 ends this permanently. I'm not in the business of long-term harassment. I collect what's owed, then move on to other business interests. And if someone doesn't pay, then they lose whatever assets were pledged as collateral. Sometimes people get hurt if they try to resist collection efforts or involve law enforcement. The wire captured his admission of threats and violence. Now I needed him to be more specific about his drug operation. How did Marcus get involved with your business originally? College party circuit. I supply product to fraternity houses, dormitory dealers, campus connections. Marcus started as a customer, then wanted to become a distributor to pay for his own usage. But he stole from you instead. Snake's expression darkened. Marcus thought he was smarter than me. Thought he could take $5,000 from my inventory and sell it independently. Keep all the profits instead of paying my commission. That's when you demanded repayment. That's when I explained the consequences of stealing from my operation. Unfortunately, Marcus chose to take his own life rather than face those consequences like a man. Perfect. Snake had just admitted to drug dealing, threatening violence, and contributing to Marcus's suicide decision. The wire had captured everything the DEA needed to build their case. But as I prepared to make my exit, Snake's younger associate whispered something in his ear that made his expression change completely. Derek, I need you to remove your shirt. My blood turned to ice water. What? Remove your shirt, now. There was no point in pretending anymore. I was caught, and trying to lie would only make things worse. I can't do that. Snake nodded to his associates, who moved to block the garage exits. Wire. Federal wire. DEA operation. You're already surrounded. Instead of panicking or getting violent, Snake actually smiled. Well, that's disappointing. I was starting to like you, Derek. Much more backbone than your brother had. It's over, Snake. Your operation, your threats against my family, all of it. Maybe. Or maybe I still have time to collect what I'm owed before law enforcement gets their paperwork sorted. That's when I realized the most crucial part of my plan. Before entering the garage, I'd done something that would ensure Snake could never threaten my family again. regardless of whether the DEA operation succeeded. I pulled out my phone and opened my social media accounts. I've been live streaming this entire conversation to Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Every threat you made, every admission of drug dealing, every detail about Marcus's debt is now public record. Snake's confidence evaporated as he realized the implications. Not only was his conversation with me recorded by federal agents, but thousands of people had witnessed his criminal admissions in real time. "You clever bastard," he muttered. Through the garage windows, I could see DEA agents moving into position. Gary's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Derek, get down on the ground. We're coming in." The arrest happened quickly and professionally. Snake and his associates were handcuffed without resistance, and I was safely evacuated from the scene. But the real victory came later that evening, when I returned to Mom and Dad's house, with concrete proof that Marcus's death wasn't anyone's fault, except Marcus's own choices and Snake's criminal influence. The livestream had been viewed over 10,000 times. Comments poured in from people across the country, praising my courage and expressing sympathy for my family's situation. More importantly, the video served as undeniable evidence that I'd risked my life to protect the people who'd blamed me for Marcus's death. Mom, Dad, and Jennifer watched the recorded stream together in their living room, seeing for the first time the full scope of what Marcus had gotten them involved in. They also saw me deliberately putting myself in danger to save them from consequences they didn't deserve. "I owe you an apology," Dad said when the video ended. His voice was quiet, humble in a way I'd never heard before. "We blamed you for something that wasn't your fault." Mom was crying again, but this time from guilt instead of grief. "We made you into a villain because we couldn't face the truth about Marcus's choices." "We all failed him in different ways," I replied. "But we don't have to keep failing each other." Gary arrived an hour later with updates from the DEA operation. Snake's entire network had been dismantled. Multiple arrests, drug seizures, and asset forfeitures would ensure he spent the next 20 years in federal prison. The documents Marcus had signed were ruled legally invalid, obtained through coercion and criminal threats. "The debt is gone," Gary announced. "Your family is safe." But more importantly than the legal victory was the healing that had begun between us. For the first time in years, possibly ever, our family was dealing with truth, instead of denial, reality, instead of comfortable lies. The road ahead would require therapy, honest communication, and rebuilding trust that had been shattered by years of dysfunction. But at least now, we had a foundation of truth to build on. 6 months after that terrifying night in Snake's garage, I sat in my new office in Columbus reviewing financial projections for my consulting business. The morning sun streamed through windows of the converted warehouse I'd rented in the short North District, illuminating the framed photo of my family, taken at Jennifer's medical school graduation just 2 weeks earlier. The photo showed all of us together for the first time since Marcus's funeral, but this time we were celebrating instead of mourning. Dad looked healthier after months of cardiac rehabilitation and stress counseling. Mom had started therapy to address the guilt and denial that had nearly destroyed our relationships. Jennifer wore her medical degree with pride earned through her own determination rather than family manipulation. And I looked like someone who'd finally learned the difference between enabling destructive behavior and supporting genuine growth. My business had grown beyond my expectations. Helping families navigate financial crises became my specialty, particularly cases involving addiction's economic impact. Word spread through professional networks about the accountant who'd taken down a drug operation to save his family, and clients sought me out specifically for complex situations requiring both financial expertise and personal courage. The morning's first appointment arrived precisely at 9 o'clock. Sarah Martinez walked into my office with the kind of confident stride that suggested she was used to solving problems rather than creating them. We'd met 3 months earlier when she was seeking financial advice for a nonprofit organization supporting families affected by addiction. "Ready for our coffee date?" she asked, smiling in a way that made my pulse quicken. Sarah was a licensed social worker who specialized in family therapy, particularly cases involving addiction and trauma recovery. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on honest conversations about our work, our values, and our experiences with family dysfunction. She understood the difference between healthy support and enabling behavior because she'd seen both sides in her professional practice. More than ready, I replied, saving my work and grabbing my jacket. We walked to our favorite coffee shop, a small place called Brewdog, where the owner knew our orders and always had our table ready by the window. Sarah ordered her usual lavender latte, while I stuck with black coffee, a habit I developed during those sleepless nights 6 months ago. "How's the family therapy session planning going?" she asked as we settled into our seats. Jennifer found a therapist in Cleveland who specializes in grief and family dysfunction. Dr. Rebecca Harrison. She comes highly recommended for families dealing with addiction aftermath. Sarah nodded approvingly. Family therapy can be incredibly healing when everyone commits to honesty and growth. Are your parents ready for that level of emotional work? Mom seems eager to address the guilt she's been carrying about enabling Marcus. Dad's still struggling with admitting he failed as a father, but he's committed to the process. What about you? Are you ready to forgive them for blaming you? It was the kind of direct question that had initially intimidated me about Sarah. She didn't allow for comfortable deflection or surface-level answers. Her training as a therapist meant she saw through emotional defenses that worked on other people. "I've forgiven them," I said honestly. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I love my family, but I won't let them use guilt and manipulation to control my decisions anymore. That's healthy boundary setting. It shows real growth. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Dad paid back the $15,000 you spent on legal fees for the DEA operation. He insisted on adding interest. Your account should show the deposit today." I showed Sarah the message, and she smiled. "Your father's trying to make amends through actions rather than just words. That's encouraging." Dad's construction business had recovered from the stress of Marcus's crisis, helped by insurance claims and a renewed focus on financial management. He'd hired a bookkeeper to maintain better records and established a policy of not mixing business assets with personal loans, even for family members. Mom had returned to real estate with a new perspective on family dynamics and personal boundaries. Her clients appreciated her understanding of crisis management and her ability to help families make difficult decisions about their homes during financial hardship. "There's something I want to discuss with you," Sarah said, her tone becoming more serious. "About us, about our relationship." My heart rate accelerated, but not from fear this time. From hope. "I've been thinking about how well we work together both personally and professionally. Your financial expertise combined with my therapeutic training could help a lot of families dealing with complex crises. Are you proposing a business partnership or something more personal?" Sarah laughed, the sound warming me from the inside. "Maybe both eventually. But I'm definitely proposing that we take the next step in our relationship. I'd like you to meet my parents next weekend." The invitation represented everything I'd learned about healthy relationships over the past 6 months. Sarah wasn't rushing into commitment based on emotional need or convenience. She was making a thoughtful decision based on compatibility, shared values, and genuine affection. "I'd love to meet your parents," I replied. Fair warning, though my family comes with some complicated history. All families have complicated histories, Derek. The question is whether they're willing to learn from their mistakes and grow together. That afternoon, I drove back to Brookfield for my weekly dinner with Mom and Dad. It had become a tradition since the therapy sessions began a way to maintain connection while respecting the boundaries I'd established. Uncle Gary's police car sat in the driveway when I arrived. He'd become a regular fixture at family dinners, working to rebuild the relationship his public condemnation had damaged. His investigation into Snake's operation had earned him a commendation from the DEA, but more importantly, it had taught him to look deeper than surface accusations before passing judgment. "Derek." Gary stood up from the kitchen table as I entered, extending his hand for our usual firm handshake. How's the business world treating you? Can't complain. 3 new clients this week, all referrals from satisfied customers. Mom appeared from the living room, her appearance reflecting the positive changes in her mental health. She'd lost the haunted look that had defined her features since Marcus's death, replacing it with cautious optimism about family healing. "Dinner's almost ready," she announced. "Your father's out back grilling chicken, trying to prove he can cook something other than hamburgers." Through the kitchen window, I could see Dad at his new gas grill, concentrating intensely on meat thermometers and timing charts. His approach to cooking reflected his approach to family relationships, now careful, methodical, determined to avoid past mistakes. "How did the session with Dr. Harrison go this week?" I asked Mom. "Difficult, but productive. We talked about the difference between supporting someone and enabling their destructive choices. I'm starting to understand how my fear of losing Marcus led me to make decisions that actually harmed him." It was the kind of insight that would have been impossible 6 months ago, when blame and denial dominated every family conversation. Jennifer arrived as we were setting the table, her medical residency schedule, allowing her to join us for dinner twice a week. She looked tired, but satisfied, the exhaustion of someone working toward meaningful goals rather than running from painful truths. "Any interesting cases this week?" Gary asked as we gathered around the table. "Overdose prevention training for college students," Jennifer replied, "teaching them to recognize signs of fentanyl poisoning and when to call for emergency help. It's the kind of program that might have saved Marcus if it had existed 2 years ago." "You're turning your grief into something that helps other families," Sarah had observed during one of our conversations. "That's how healing transforms pain into purpose." Dad raised his water glass in an impromptu toast. "To second chances and learning from our mistakes." We clinked glasses around the table, acknowledging the journey that had brought us to this point. Not the happy family we'd pretended to be before Marcus's addiction crisis, but an honest family committed to growth and truth. After dinner, I stayed to help with cleanup, while Gary and Jennifer played cards in the living room. Mom and Dad worked alongside me in comfortable silence until Dad finally spoke. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Harrison said regarding making amends for past mistakes." "What about it?" "I want you to know that your refusal to co-sign Marcus's loans was the right decision. If you'd enabled his borrowing, he probably would have gotten deeper into debt and put our family at even greater risk." Mom nodded agreement. "We taught Marcus that his actions didn't have real consequences. You were the only one who tried to enforce healthy boundaries." "It didn't feel like the right decision when I made it," I admitted. "It felt selfish and cold." "Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's self-destruction," Mom replied. "I wish I'd learned that lesson before it was too late to help Marcus." As I prepared to leave for Columbus that evening, Gary pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I need to ask you something, Derek. Do you really forgive me for what I said at the funeral? For turning the whole community against you?" "I forgive you, Gary. But more importantly, I understand why you reacted that way. Marcus's death was traumatic for everyone who loved him. Still, I should have listened to your side before passing judgment. A good cop investigates before reaching conclusions." Gary had become my strongest advocate in the community, using his position as a respected police officer to correct the false narrative that had spread after Marcus's funeral. People who'd shunned me 6 months ago now nodded respectfully when they saw me around town. The drive back to Columbus gave me time to reflect on the complete transformation our family had experienced. We'd gone from blaming and denial to accountability and growth. From manipulation and enabling to honest communication and healthy boundaries. Most importantly, we'd learned that family loyalty must be earned through truthful behavior rather than demanded through guilt and obligation. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex. Sarah's name appeared on the screen and I answered with genuine happiness. "How was dinner with your family?" "Healing, honest. Everything I'd hoped it could become." "I'm glad. Family relationships require constant work, but they're worth the effort when everyone commits to growth." Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about meeting your parents, about taking our relationship to the next level. And I think I'm ready for both. Not because I need someone to complete me, but because I want to share my life with someone who values truth and growth as much as I do. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, she laughed. As I ended the call and walked toward my apartment building, I realized that Marcus's death had ultimately taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Real family protects each other from harm, including the harm we might cause ourselves. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable destruction even when others call it heartlessness. I'd lost a brother, but I'd gained a family based on truth instead of manipulation. I'd lost a comfortable relationship, but I'd found genuine love built on shared values. I'd lost my role as the family scapegoat, but I'd gained respect as someone who fights for what's right. The pain of Marcus's death would always be part of our family story, but it no longer defined us or controlled our relationships with each other. Standing in my apartment looking at the photo of Jennifer's graduation celebration, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine peace about my place in the world and confidence about the future I was building. Marcus had texted me that cruel message hoping to hurt me one final time. Instead, his death had forced all of us to confront truth and choose growth over comfortable lies. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you never knew you needed. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where standing up for what's right meant going against your family's expectations? How do you balance loyalty to loved ones with holding them accountable for destructive behavior? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help it reach families who might be struggling with similar challenges. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family dysfunction and building healthier relationships. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries, even with the people you love most. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes healing is possible, even in the most broken situations. Remember, you deserve relationships built on truth, respect, and genuine love. Don't settle for anything less. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly care about your well-being.